Hey, greetings everyone. This is Richard Harris, and I am back on Sales Hacker. It has been a long time. I guess you could say I'm unleashed. So now that Sales Hacker and Outreach are together, I think it's okay for me to say that. I'm also super excited to be joined in this session by someone I've gotten to know, I would say 9 or 10 years, Carolyn. It's Carolyn Betts from Betts Recruiting. It's always fun to talk to you. So thank you so much for coming on the Sales Hacker webinar.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
It is. We haven't chatted, I think, since the Surf and Sales podcast. Hint, hint, plug. But we'll move on from there. Can't blame me for trying, right? So we're here to talk today about hiring the sales team. We're going to go through some interview questions specifically. I know that we're also going to open this up to the audience in just a second. In fact, while I'm explaining this, we're going to have our behind the scenes Wizards of Oz pop up a poll situation where you can go in and drop in your name and your company and your title, or just your name and your title. I think it's great because it'll give you a chance to see who else is on this webinar, right? And I think that's super fun. In fact, I'm going to go do this really cool. Let's see, what am I? I don't know. I guess I'm sales leadership. It won't even let me vote. It says I can't vote. Carolyn, we aren't allowed to vote.
Other?
Anyway, that being said, we really want this to be interactive. It's not about us. It's really about the audience. So if you have questions or you have a comment that you want to put into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, I'm monitoring that. So please participate, because we know these things can get boring and the brain will only absorb as much as the butt will tolerate. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move forward. Here's who we are. We have Carolyn and myself popping up. If you don't know us, now you do. Things you should know. Yes, we're being recorded. We can share this with you. You'll get, I think if you subscribe to it, you will be getting a copy of it. It'll be posted again on Sales Hacker. We'll probably post on social media. If you have any questions, like I said, please go ahead and put those in. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the importance of hiring the best candidates. We're going to talk about 6 tried and true interview questions for finding ideal sales candidates. The 4 obvious questions that you should never miss. And obviously we'll do some Q&A, and I even threw a curveball at Carolyn to say, what do we think are the dumbest questions people are asking in interviews? So I'm going to try to stop talking now and turn this over to, we've already done the poll. This is how prepared I am. So let's go ahead to the 6 interview questions, right? Like, it's always live. Trust me. If I took down my background, you'd see I'm in my son's room. Carolyn, how do you remain knowledgeable? Tell us about this question. Why do you like this question?
Yeah, I think nowadays, hiring is obviously the first step into bringing people into your organization. However, there's a big responsibility on the company to train, develop, and make sure they're continuing to develop the talent in their company. I find, though, that people that already have a thirst for learning, follow the blogs, listen to things like this, have a head start. And they're not coming in fresh. They know what's going on. They know what they're getting themselves into when they come into a sales role. And they understand the ecosystem. And so when you ask this, and people have, I follow Sales Hacker, I follow Richard and Scott and all these other opportunities out there, Jake Dunlap, all the things, they tend to just, that the cream rises to the top. And I really believe in ongoing education. And this is a big indicative thing that somebody's a talented person that believes in continuing their own education.
No, I completely agree. I'm going to flip this a little bit too, because, whether you're a candidate or someone who's about to become a candidate looking to be interviewed and you're on this webinar, or you're a hiring manager and you're part of this webinar, here's my thing. When you go to an interview, if I'm the candidate, guess what? I'm interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing me, right? The culture's got to fit both ways. And yeah, I bring a little attitude to this because let's face it, it's a webinar. But I also think you could turn around and politely ask your manager, your hiring manager, hey, how do you stay knowledgeable? Because I want to know how good of a leader they are for me. How are they going to help me stay knowledgeable? Or I might say, hey, here's what I follow. I follow these people. How are you going to help me keep staying knowledgeable about this industry? Because maybe it's a new industry. So I love this question. I think it's really good. And we can flip it, right? It goes both ways. So all the hiring managers, you better be prepared to answer just like your candidates are. So
Right, and especially for junior people, I think that as a leader, if somebody doesn't have a really great list of things that they're already following, and maybe they come up a little short on this, maybe a slight red flag, but at the same time maybe they don't know what they don't know, so being able to offer them some insight as to of resources that they should be
yep,
checking out, and then seeing if they actually do that between the conversation and the next conversation, if you decide to move them forward, is always a good indicator if they take feedback well once they join the company.
totally agree. Love this one too. This one throws me off. So Carolyn, let's talk about this one. I think this is one of those questions.
Right. And, we're not trying to trick people when they come into interviews. And yeah, I mean, you just want to see how people think, right? How are they going to think through this? They're both important, right? We have to have people hitting quota to keep the lights on, and, bringing the revenue into the company that people have promised the, executives and shareholders and whatnot. But that's not going to happen if your customers aren't happy. And so, I'm answering the question a little bit, but it's just, this is one of those, allowing people to think through what they think is important. It gives you insight into that. What do you think, Richard?
Oh, this is a tough one. I almost wonder if this is generational, right? So I'm a Gen Xer, and it's kind of like, how can I not say hitting the number? Like I like, it makes me nervous. If I said customer happiness, I'd be like, I think it would freak me out. Like that's not who I am. So I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, and maybe that's my way of saying I disagree with saying that customer happiness is the right answer. But I get it, I understand it, but as a salesperson, I'm not hired to do that. I'm not hired. I'm hired, and that doesn't. Now, don't get me wrong. Nobody should go out and lie to their customers or prospects. Nobody should go out and be misleading. You always tell the truth. You talk about what you're good at. If someone calls you on something that you're not, you got to admit it. If there's a competitive comparison, you better know your stuff. But it's interesting. So I'm curious if it's generational. I could see the younger generation getting behind that a whole lot more than my school.
For sure. And I do think it comes down to the consultative selling and really understanding what a customer's needs are. And yes, but hitting quota, honestly, if that's not important to you, you're probably not right for sales.
So that just scares me. It's interesting though, because some people are commenting in the chat box that they're the same thing, and I have to agree with that too, because I have clients, right? I have customers, and I know that if I don't drive their happiness, I'm never going to have another customer again. So maybe I'm coming around. Maybe I won't yell at everybody to get off my lawn. So yeah, you young rascals, I'd have gotten away with it too, except for that rascal dog. Um, how do you decide if someone's not the right fit? Like, what happens? How do you look at that, Carolyn?
Well, yeah, I think this is really interesting, right? Because there's a lot out there in the thought leadership world when it comes to sales about, there's in sales in general, right? There are a lot of companies that people can sell into, and each sales organization did in their your or if you're time can be that it's about allegation. So I think that when you ask this question, it's another one of you. Anytime you're interviewing somebody, really the opportunity is to see how they think, right? And to see how they're going to walk through what they evaluate when they're looking at their prospects, who they think is going to close and who's not. And, I think that those of us that have been in sales for a long time, when we hear our employees talk through and you see something on their forecast week after week after week after week, and, the percentage is high, all of us are like, I saw that on here, 6 weeks ago. Why is that still on here? Like, why has it not closed yet? What are the holdups? And usually it's a sign of, lost interest. And there's obviously plenty other factors, but the reason I think this is a great question is that you understand how people value their time, how they rank their prospects, how they manage their entire sales funnel, and so
Mhm.
that's why I think that this is a great interview question.
Yeah, no, I think this is a fun one, and particularly for the interesting one if you're in that SDR role, right, where you're in your first or second sales job and you're still trying to figure it out. This is another fun question I would turn around and flip one to the person interviewing. He's like, "Hey, how does your organization teach us to that the prospect isn't right?" Right? And your leadership's going to give you the, well, if they're not our ICP and they're not on the, I'd be like, yeah, but what else? Because everybody tells me that. Like, this is where I'm trying to test the knowledge of my leadership to see if they can actually be a good leader for me, right? And I'm not trying to put them in a gotcha moment, but I think that all this stuff goes both ways. Like, I'm a huge fan of it. So we're getting lots of chats, which I really really like. Um, People are definitely disagreeing with me on the last question, which is cool. Like, I'm okay with that. Like, that's good. So, um, another good question. Tell me about a time you collaborated within the sales team or with other teams. Love this question. Carolyn, what's your favorite part about this?
Well, I think long long gone are the days when the lone wolf is appreciated in a sales organization, right? And I know we both, we keep talking about how old and seasoned we are, but the lone wolf really used to have a place, right? Always hitting quota, doesn't collaborate with other people, and that's just not how cultures are built nowadays. And in order to get deals across and to keep customers from churning, it takes a village, right? And a lot of it involves, working with the SDR team, working with the AE team, sales engineers, your sales leader, and understanding people that and how they feel that they fit within the sales organization, how they're able to leverage their resources. I mean, the best salespeople get in front of the right people, but they're not trying to get the whole thing done themselves. They're bringing in folks. I mean, I remember the last software product we bought here at Betts, and it was very recent. And we switched from a competitor to this provider, and but I'll tell you, it was outreach, obviously outreach, but the sales rep did an amazing job of collaborating with multiple people on the team and getting a lot of stakeholders involved about not just what the product will do for us, but what the overall relationship and that really made a huge difference for me as the buyer to see how collaborative their company is and how well they work together. And it really gave me confidence that once I became a customer, my experience would be just as good as it was during the sales process. So I think looking at reps that really understand that is a huge win when you're bringing them onto your team.
Yeah,
Um,
we used to ask this question. This is a long time ago, so this is back in the day when Richard had hair. But we used to ask the question of, would you rather have a team member who could hit $1 million of business every year, or would you rather have a congenial team player who could consistently hit $500,000 every year, right? And that for me. And this was certainly, I'll even say, in the '90s, last century. That was a way that we tried to figure out what that lone wolf looked like versus that team player. And at that time we kind of wanted a little bit of both. We didn't mind. But let me ask you this, because you said the days of the lone wolf are gone. Does that mean you think the challenger sale is no longer applicable? Or because that's where that phrase, at least that's where I learned that phrase of the lone wolf. Or are you just sort of dropping it and yes, you still love challenger?
well, I think the challenger. Um, from what I remember from that book, and it's been a while since I've read it, is that when you're dealing with prospects and potential customers, understanding how they're doing their business and suggesting that that there could be a better way of doing it. And I don't think that that is necessarily. I actually think it goes in line with what as the sales rep, you might. I think that part of that is bringing in data and other folks and collaborating with your team. I think the lone wolf is, hey, I don't need you guys. I'm just going to make this happen. Don't worry about me. And in some organizations, right, I think more enterprise sales that might work, but you also want to, the SEs have limited time. and they're going to give their time to the people that they, everyone has choices of who they take meetings with, who they go on trips with, who they help get their deals over the line. And I think that the people that win most often are the ones that are able to leverage those resources. So I'm not saying challenger sales wrong, but I do think that listening to how people collaborate with their team to win as a whole is a very important part about bringing somebody into an organization.
Yeah, I also think too, like it's interesting because I also think lone wolves do try to collaborate. They do express what they're looking for, what they need from the organization. Um, I think their approach at collaboration is very different than what many of us think it is, right? I'm not a lone wolf when it comes to a salesperson, right? Because I don't think that they sit out there in the field, not doing stuff. I think they're like, hey, I do need this and it will help. And maybe they ruffle feathers. Maybe that's what the lone wolf does. But I certainly think they collaborate. It might just be in a different way than what you're thinking. And to your point, if you've got an inside team versus a field team, well, field people kind of need to be a lone wolf. They kind of need to be able to motivate themselves and get up and go every day and all that stuff. So thanks for
Absolutely.
exploring that. Um, this is a really good one. I actually was in a training yesterday and someone said, what do you do, Richard, when this happens? So but let's talk about using it as an interview question.
Yeah, I mean, when you ask this, so, what are you looking to hear? I want to hear from you.
For me, if I'm asking this, um, I'm looking to see how they think, right? Because oftentimes you ask this question, it actually makes them emotionally remember one that they lost, which then means it hurts, right? So for me, I want someone to acknowledge that it sucked, right? Like, hey, before I follow up with somebody, I have to acknowledge that I hate it and it sucked, but I've got to figure out how to stay engaged with that person because I want them to own their relationship with that deal or that opportunity as well as that prospect and then see how they move forward because that's in life, that's how relationships work, right? If you're with a significant other and you have a disagreement, you don't just sort of like throw them out of the pipeline, right? Or hopefully you don't that's just not how relationships and marriages and that kind of stuff work. So I think that's important. The things I like to hear, I like to hear from someone that, hey, I'll usually go talk to a teammate and walk through it with them so they can help me decompress. I will ask them, hey, I think I should follow up this way. What do you think? Because I'm so emotional. I want them to recognize that they're emotional about it and that
Totally.
they're not going to send an emotional response back, right? That's what I'm looking for if I'm hiring a salesperson. Um, I also think that for me, this is me, so I might be projecting, is not responding right away. You might need to give yourself and them 24 hours, give them that space, right? They're not there to be your psychiatrist or psychologist and help you dry your tears, right? Um, I think it's a little bit like your space, Carolyn, like, you put candidates in front of people and that candidate doesn't get chosen, your reps have to tell that candidate, I'm sorry, Richard, you weren't chosen. And then that rep might get really emotional. And now all of a sudden you're the best sales rep is an armchair psychologist, right? And that's hard. And respectfully, that's not the role of your person. It doesn't mean that they don't care about your candidates or those kinds of things, but there's a balance in there and people have to sort of figure this out a little bit. That's a very long answer for my answer, but
Right.
what are you looking for?
Well, and to be fair, it's not their role, right? Like at our company, I do expect for people when something doesn't work out to give the feedback and it's been a while since I've been on some of these calls where we have to, be the bearer of bad news. But generally, there's something that people can learn
Hmm.
from any lost opportunity on anything, whether it's a lost job opportunity, lost prospect, lost deal, etc. And I think that a big theme I'm seeing here in this conversation is when we're interviewing, we're really trying to see how people think through things, how they react to different situations. Sales is not easy. And, my favorite answer to this, and this is, there's no, in a perfect world, this is ideal, right? And we're not living in a perfect world, but the longer you do this and the more you understand the psychology around sales, is that if you've done a good job on the front end, there shouldn't be major surprises of lost deals on the back end, right? You've asked the right questions, you understand their needs, you know who else is in there, and always there's going to be surprises. But I think you want to hear from, if I've lost a deal, I know it far before it's actually lost. And at this point, I'm thinking it's a Hail Mary, and when I follow up, I'm looking to learn, right? And in a non-emotional way, it's like, hey, I understand this decision. Walk me through what happened, and taking that data back to the company. Is it a product issue? Was it our process? Was it price? Did you go with a competitor? Did you do nothing? And so then that gives you more information, because a lost deal this year is an opportunity for a sales opportunity next year, or whatever the timeline is of the deal that they're signing, or it could just be punted to next quarter. And so I think the more of a level head that you have as you approach these things, the more people are going to be wanting to do business with you in the future.
Yeah, I think if I were interviewing someone, I'd love someone to say, "Hey, this is what I would do when I lose a deal." I say, "Hey, thank you for including me in the opportunity." Right? I want my rep to say that. I would probably say, "Hey, if there's something that I could do just to learn from this, will you please share? By the way, don't worry, I'm not going to turn around and yeah, but you." Like I actually do that when I lose deals, because I ask about it. Um, I then I put them on a tickle file, and it's usually, depending if I know when they were doing their training or something, I'll sort of ping them again in 30 or 60 days to say, "Hey, just staying on top of things. I hope it went well. Did it go well? Did you get what you wanted out of it? What does next quarter look like?" Because I think there's an opportunity there if it's more of a SaaS product, right? Like if it is a different SaaS product, I might call them I'd want my rep in an interview to say, "Well, you know what? I call them in 30 days to see how onboarding went." Like those are the kinds of answers I'm looking for in an interview, is that this person knows how to take the rejection, knows how to respond to it, and then knows how to just make sure you stay in touch. To your point, Carolyn, because in a year from now, that contract still comes up, right? And you got another shot, right? So I think
Absolutely.
I think that's really, really good. Let's go on to the next one. We're going to hit the top six, and then we'll go into the next four, and then we're going to talk about something else that's not actually planned. Um, what are
Great.
you? Yeah, what are you not interested in doing professionally? Right. So I think this is a great interview question, because you do need to get to know people, right? I think that's the purpose of this one, is what are your hobbies outside the office, so you can get to know someone. What is your thought on this one, Carolyn? Why do you like this one?
Well, I think this stemmed from the conversation we had on the Surf and Sales podcast of trying to understand, like, yes, I want to understand when I'm interviewing somebody, I want to understand their career goals and what they're bringing to the table, what they want to do long term, why they're interested in this job, and how that's going to help them get there. Obviously, there's some accountability on my end to fill them in on that. However, right, it's so crazy. People come in and if I had $1 for every time somebody told me they don't want a cold call, I, we would, it would be a wildly successful business. And because there's a lot of things that people just don't want to do. And are there sales jobs out there that, with inbound leads, et cetera, you're not having to prospect, but eventually you, in a career of sales, you likely will, right? And so I find that when you ask this question, it's a little bit of a leading question, but I think that it opens people up to share, how they feel about different things, and to see if it is really gonna, because if I lead with all the things of the job and say, "How do you feel about doing this?" and people are going to say, "Oh, that sounds great," right? "I can't wait," and because they're trying to get the job. But when you flip the script and ask them, "Hey, what are you not interested in doing?" you'll get more insight into, what they're frankly not interested in doing. And if that's part of the job, then great. You say, "Hey, honestly, this is part of this role. Maybe we can help you find something that's a better fit that doesn't involve doing those things."
Totally agree. I agree with everything you said on that. Well, I don't know why that's going for that way. Sorry. Um, let's pause for a second before we go next. We talked about this offline, Carolyn. What are some bad interview questions that we wish managers would stop asking? Do you know any? I've got a couple, but I'm just want to flip it a little bit, and let's get people to stop asking, or people in the chat, like, "Hey, everybody, what interview questions do you think are terrible questions to be asking?" Um, so I will, I will start with one.
Yeah.
and I tell this story because it was my mom. And remember, this was the 70s, 1970, and she was going in to sell radio ads. And she tells me this story kind of regularly. And the question was quite simply, so are you planning to have any more kids? Right? Like today, it's like, you can't ask that question. Like we know that, but like those, like, what are some of the other crazy interview questions you've heard, or the ones that you've maybe you stopped asking because maybe they just didn't work. They didn't give you anything valuable.
Yeah, well, I definitely, and in terms of you just got me going down the legal route here, right? And I think this is something important for a lot of these sales leaders out there to know that in many states, and the ones that we do business in California, New York, and many, 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 you want to check on the state. And if you, I just recommend stopping asking this question in
Yeah,
general of, how much are you making right now? What did you W-2 last year? And 5 years ago, that question was totally acceptable. It was part of the process. And it was a good sign for the candidate, right? It's, hey, I'm getting close to an offer. And a lot of people that were great at sales want to come in and say, hey, I W-2 this. They have their W-2 ready to go. And then they get an offer that'll be an increase and an opportunity that's going to take them financially to the next level. However, it's now illegal in those states and in many states in the U.S. to ask those questions. So
yep,
please stop asking that. However, as a candidate, you are absolutely able to volunteer that information. So, and it's all about personal preference, right? And do what makes you feel comfortable.
yep,
But if you have a history of high earnings, then, my recommendation would be to, let them, you don't want to get an offer that you're disappointed in, and you don't want them to have to go back and, keep going to bat, get more and more and more money to finance it. And you would likely like to have the person armed going into these negotiations of what type of offer are you interested in accepting to come on board. So anyway, that's one that just it's just
I think it's great. I think it's great. Like this again, because this is how irreverent I used to be. People, they would say, what was your W-2? And I say, great. I actually have it in my pocket, and I'd actually pull it out and I'd keep it covered. And I say, great, go get me your top 3 reps W-2s and white out their name right now. And the boss would look at me like, well, I can't give out that information. I'm like, I know. Like, I like to put people on the spot, but that was my original. Hence me being a consultant now. I love, like, the chat's blowing up on this one, and I really love it. Is these are the questions people say that they don't like to use anymore, and I don't know if these people are the candidates who are tired of hearing these questions, or if they're the people who are hiring managers who know not to ask them. What's your 30, 60, 90-day plan? I think those are very, very interesting ones myself. I used to get asked that a lot, and I used to say, you can have it after I get hired. Like, I'm not going to do free consulting for you, right? I do think there's something that to talk about, though, about how do you like to build your progression, right? What do you like to try and accomplish as you ramp? And I think there's an appropriate question around ramp for both the candidate and the boss or the supervisor to ask, because I think ramp time is something that's often avoided in sales interviews, and I think it's appropriate to talk about it. But I agree, not a 30, 60, 90-day plan. The
yeah.
strength that Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the 30, 60, 90 has really become like a very cliche term in the world out there. And I think Scott Britton actually had a really interesting post on LinkedIn this morning about this exercise in particular. And, the ethos of it was, coming into this conversation about, okay, and I don't love the 30, 60, 90, but what I do think it's important for reps to think about, okay, the point of the exercise isn't to get a bunch of free work. It's the same as all these other questions and everything that we're talking about. How are you going to approach this? Is this a conversation between us and you? You have some ideas, get some feedback, right? And so maybe we should revamp okay, now that you've gone through the interview process as last step, let's talk about what's next and what things would look like as you're coming in. And maybe we can rebrand that exercise is something that fits better in today's world of sales. But I really like to see some thought put into it and have people come with an exercise of who they think great prospects are, who they would call, what they would get started doing, and what the expectations are, as they ramp in the role.
Yeah. There's another, I agree with you. I think there's a way to ask it in a more meaningful way than what we normally think of. Right. And probably generationally what it meant when someone asked me that question. And there's there's a couple of other ones that people don't like, which are, tell me your strengths and weaknesses, which I can see that one both ways. But the one that I really want to talk about is, tell me about your 5-year plan. Right. Do you like that question or do you not like that question? And if so, why?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah, I think it's a little old, dated, right? I remember on the AMO group when I was there from '04 to '08. But the purpose of that question is just to understand where people want to go in their career, right? And you can ask that. It's also so I don't have a strong emotional sense to it. I think a lot of these questions that have been asked over time need to be revamped. And where somebody used to stay at a job for 5 years, the likelihood with the world right now, and I definitely recommend staying in jobs for 2 years minimum. But there's a lot of people that move more frequently than that, and you can't really assume that they're still going to be at your company, right? And because that was the answer that people used to want to hear with that. And that's not so I do think it helps people walk through what their plans, what their goals are in their career. And as somebody who's looking to hire people, I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like, I think it's for me, it's an interesting question in the third or fourth or fifth interview, right? Because now some rapport has been established. If it's asked too soon, and even if it's later when the rapport's been established, the reason I think it's not a good question is all you're going to get is a lie. I want your job, Carolyn, right? Like, you're going to get lied to. And then we feel good because, okay, well, I think they're motivated to stay. Right. And that's the challenge I have with that question, why I don't think it's good. I do agree with you that this used to be used a long time ago. And now with people changing jobs so much more frequently, it kind of seems silly. The other thing is, who at 22 or 23 knows what the fuck they want to be doing in 5 years, right? I sure didn't, right? My plan didn't go quite the way I thought it would. And I also think too, in sales, if you're earlier in your career, the beautiful thing about sales is that it's a great experience, but you may decide you don't want to be in sales and it may take you 2 or 3 years to figure it out. So how should I expect you to know that if I'm talking to an SDR candidate or a first or second year person, right? I think there's a way to morph it earlier with one of those earlier questions we did, like, well, what do you like to do? This last question of what are you interested to doing outside your profession? What are your life goals? What do you want to accomplish? Because that then allows you to sort of morph that into a sales relationship piece. At least that's how I see it. But I think it's a great question. I love people. I love people putting all this stuff in the chat. So thank you with that, and thank you everybody. So if you aren't paying attention to the chat, go check it out. Lots of people are chatting it up, and we love it. We love it. So let's go forward. So
now, real quick on that, what do understanding their life goals. One of my favorite things to look at on people's, resumes or LinkedIn is their interests, right? I find that those spark some interesting conversations. And if you put it on there, I think it's fair game. And it's one of the places I start when I open a conversation with someone. Oh, hey, I see you put this, especially if it's something you don't see all the time. And you get to really see what people are passionate and excited about. And yeah, you can be excited about crushing your quota or whatever deal you won or lost, but it gives you a real sense of who people are as people.
Yeah, I've got a good friend from college. Literally, I want to say he graduated from college at, in the top 50 of all students when we graduated. He's got an accounting degree and a law degree. Granted, we went to the University of Arizona, so it was fun. We had a good time. Yeah. But I remember, like, somewhere between his sophomore and junior year, he went to Chicago to literally just hawk peanuts and sodas at the Cubs and the White Sox game. And he still has it on his LinkedIn profile, and people still read it and bring it up. on a fairly regular basis. Like, to Carolyn's point, that stuff matters, right? We
Yep.
want to see the person, not the rep, right? We need to know about the rep, but we also want to see the authenticity of the person. So, um, but anyway, let's go forward with these next 4 obvious sales interview questions. So, all right, I didn't build the seat. What are your professional weaknesses? All right, this was one that was brought up a moment ago. Like it, don't like it. What do we think?
It's kind of a dull question in my mind, right? Like I'm not a huge fan of it. I think you're going to get a bunch of lies. You know, nothing comes to mind.
Oh, this was the standard for me. Like, my weakness is actually my strength because it tells me something I can work on, right? Like, that's, it
Yeah.
is terrible. It's a bad one.
work too hard. I don't. I'm unable to balance work and life.
Right.
It just becomes tough because I'm so dedicated.
Yeah, but I also think this actually morphs into that first question that we talked about, which is, how do you stay up to date? How do you stay current? How do you do things? Like, because that tells me that it doesn't mean that your lack of knowledge means you're weak. It just means you're trying to self-educate, right? And I think that first question is a much stronger replacement than this question. Oh my God, the chat's blowing up. I can't even read everything fast enough. Keep it going, everybody. This is fantastic. Um, the offshoot of this, because I am catching up on the chat, is that someone says, well, what would a manager say is one of your biggest strengths and weaknesses, right? What would one of your previous managers, if we call it, do a reference check, right? Which we do, right? We're supposed to. I don't mind asking the question that way because I do think it does show some self-awareness. But asking someone to define their own is always awkward, icky.
I really love that. Right? Now, what would if I called her right now? What would I think that's a really good one. And then if they're not expecting it, it makes them think, okay, what would they say? And I think you'll get a lot of honesty there, especially because the opportunity to call them. And now, but we can go into the whole reference checking conversation of how, somebody's current employer, blah 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 blah. But we digress. So what's next on here?
By the way, that would be a really fun webinar. Is what's the best way to do a reference check? Because I don't think anybody ever taught me how to do it. I was like, well, would you hire him again? Like, that would be a whole other fun conversation to have with you, Carolyn. I think if y'all haven't written that content, I would encourage you guys to do it.
I think we should. Yes.
So, next one. How do you handle objections? I don't mind this question. I think this is talking about someone's skill set of the job that they have to do day in and day out. I like this question. What's your take on it?
Yeah, and I think it's pretty abstract, right? So, I think that actually going into a real potential role play, I don't think in the first interview, obviously, but and seeing how they act through it, right? Because I think it depends on what the objection is. It's a little bit difficult, but I think in general, it's good to understand how they handle real life situations with prospects and customers.
Yeah, that's great. Oh my God, I love this. I have to bring this up because it's too funny.
Yeah.
What's my biggest weakness? Pretending that you're a great interviewer for the job. How am I doing? Like, I love that response. Fantastic. That sounds like something I would say. I'm jealous that I didn't have the wit and the speed to come up with that. Another question: why are you leaving the current company? Right. These are very obvious questions, right? What kind of answers do we want to hear from candidates? Right. How honest do we want them to be?
Yeah. A little FYI, whether it's the worst place you've ever worked on the planet, do not talk about it in an interview. And this is so indicative of what, and I think that you want to, because when somebody leaves your company, I feel like if they bring a lot of negativity about their former company, they're going to be able to find things that are negative in your company. And a lot of our clients at Betts, this is one of the number one reasons, like in the final interview, that we see people not getting offers is because they spoke negatively. And, even sometimes it's like the company was acquired, right? Loved working there all these years, but now it's, and I think that one's a little different, that response, but I always ask this question. It's one of the, you know,
So how do you coach? Let's talk about this for a second, right? You know, one of the Betts recruiters is talking to a candidate who's left a company, and it didn't go well. Doesn't, and by the way, doesn't go well mean it's the rep's fault, and doesn't mean the company's fault. It could just mean it wasn't a good fit. Maybe they left a manager they didn't like, right? How do you coach for those who are in the interview process right now? How do you coach them to answer this question? What do they say? Do you just say, you know what, it just wasn't a good fit, and I'm going to leave it at that? Do you coach them to say, you know what, um, I was approaching this way, they were approaching it that way. It just, was oil and water. Like, what's the right kind of answer that someone should give, and what's the right kind of answer we want the hiring manager to go, okay, this person's okay in this situation.
well, I think that coming to that conversation with what you want now, right? What are you looking for? Really understanding what's going to line up with your next step allows you to answer this question more objectively. And I think you want to be somewhat honest, and it's tough, right? And I also think that you're in a better position if you have a longer previous track record and you have one blip on your resume as opposed to on your in your background, as opposed to company after company after company, things just aren't working out. Well, that's going to be a tough bet to take unless somebody really right. So I guess what do you coach people on is having a good understanding of what they want to do next, what they learned from that experience, right? Hey, I frankly we parted ways and it wasn't the right fit for XYZ. I wouldn't go too deep into it, but what I've learned now is this, and here's what I want to do, and here's what I'm looking for, and here's what I'm going to do to make sure that I'm successful wherever I go next.
That's great. So we're sort of getting to the end of our questions that we're talking about. So folks, if you want to go and ask Carolyn or I a question, please go into the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll be sure to get to as many of those as we can in the next 10 or few minutes. We're going to go through this last question. I'm going to talk to Carolyn a little bit about what's happening over at Betts, and then we'll get to everybody's Q&A. So the where do you see yourself in 5 years question, I think we've already answered it. I forgot that was the last one. So, right. As I like to tell people, I had a lot of fun in high school before it was legal. I'll just leave it at that. You can take it from there. But while people are pumping in some questions, right, let's talk a little bit about Betts, right? Whether you're let's talk about it from the hiring manager's perspective. What kind of resources do you guys have for those folks? And then I do want to hear, well, what resources do you have for the candidates, right? Because who knows when they need to go to someone like Betts, but they don't go to Betts just because they need a job or
Right.
just because they need a candidate. I know that enough about you that you try to educate and help. So share some stuff with folks so they know what they can get from you guys as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of resources on our website. We're always refreshing them for both the talent side or people that are hiring. And a lot of times those people are interchangeable, right? Sometimes you're looking to explore a next opportunity. Sometimes you want to build your team. So everything from tips to interviewing and I can't really remember exactly what we have on there right this second, but every few days we post something that we're coming across and some information that you can find valuable on our website. And recently we launched Betts Connect, which allows salespeople to showcase their experience through the accolades that they've received, whether you're a recent grad all the way up to a very seasoned sales leader. It'll allow you to put up your who you sold, all the data that is important to sales that outside of a lot of these more nuanced type of questions to really get to know you, you can show your stuff on our platform. So that's
So
very
yeah,
exciting.
so talk to me. Tell me what pain you think, when you came up with this idea for Betts Connect, because I think it's really cool. What pain is it trying to solve for either the hiring manager or the rep, right? Aside from just showcasing, what else is it helping everybody figure out?
Well, I think a lot of time is spent on interviews, and we didn't even really get into this. And it's something that I think most people are actually pretty good at, right? Hey, what was your quota? What percent did you hit? The little nitty gritty of past performance. It nails all that out. And so, hire people that are looking for new jobs can show what they've done in the past and also say, hey, here's what I'm looking for next. And sales leaders, as well as internal you know, HR and internal recruiting people can make sure that when they're reaching out to people that it's in line with what they're looking for, at least with a certain degree. So it saves people a lot of time. It allows the sales reps that have been really successful to showcase that. The people that have not quite hit quota, that's okay too. And yeah, so I think that's what it offers. And then you don't necessarily have to use our service at Bets. People can find you. You can just put yourself up there. You don't have to talk to a recruiter over and over and over again unless you want to. And same for the hiring authority side. They can just get fresh people every week and not have to go through the more in-depth service. And if you want more hand holding, Bets Recruiting is great. And if you want to kind of run your own thing, then Bets Connect is the best option for you.
That's cool. So I got a really good question, and it's one that wasn't positioned in here, but I think it's something we all have to figure out, and work on is, um, how do you appropriately ask about someone's compensation expectations that is without saying show me your W-2, and when should you be asking about compensation expectations when you're interviewing a candidate? Is it the first interview, the second interview, the third interview? And this, for this moment, this is coming from the hiring manager's point of view, not the candidate point of view.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another, sorry, shameless plug for Bets Connect. It'll already have that on there so people know, and that's a really good data point to vet. But let's say you don't have that information. Um, I think at the end of the first interview, if you want to move forward, just to make sure the person's in, like, it depends on how strict your company is of where the bands fall. If there's a lot of flexibility, I think you're okay to bring it up later. If there's very strict ranges, everybody's time is valuable. And I can't tell you how many times we've had, people get to the end of the process and have comp not aligned for what, and we've told the hiring manager they still want to talk to the, all the, it wasn't our fault. I'm kidding, but there was just misinformation, and everyone is frustrated because everyone put a lot of time. They were really excited, and then the numbers didn't align. So I think the earlier that you can talk about it without it just seeming way too much too soon. So there's a little bit of a balance there. I don't know. What do you think, Richard?
I think it needs to be very direct, and I think we kind of have to get over this emotional piece. And the problem is that money is an emotional thing, right? Finance is an emotional thing. Pricing is an emotional thing. Purchasing is an emotional decision, right? And I think we have to try to take a deep breath and separate ourselves from it. And I think we just have to find a way I think it's better once there's rapport there that you can then have a more honest conversation, right? If I've on my second or third interview and we talk about compensation, in the second or third, it's a more honest conversation than if it's in the first. If it's in the first, everybody's still too defensive, right? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what my hiring budget is. I'm not going to tell you what my real OTE is, or I'm going to lie about my OTE. And I think that's a little bit different too, depending on the marketplace. If you're in San Francisco, New York, or Austin these days, from a tech perspective, you may not get that chance, right? You may have to have it easier, or have it sooner. And you may have to say, look, this might be awkward, but we know it's a fast market. So we want to talk about, OTE and align expectations. And I think if you can talk about compensation as aligning the expectation versus the compensation, it makes it a little bit easier, because if things aren't aligned, then there's nothing you can do, right? Or you can at least say, all right, we're not aligned, but you know what? I really want to go work for you, right? Like, I like you as my manager, and that's your chance to sell them. So I see that as a really good one. So let me see. I think there's a couple of questions that's coming in from the chat. So give me 1 second to go read it. I don't really get that question, Daniel. So if you could rewrite it and shorten it, that would be okay. Um, I do want to flip this around, and I know most people know this, but I want to make sure we say it again, and particularly for people to come back and listen. Um, when should a sales candidate or any hiring candidate bring up compensation? When should they do it?
Sorry, I was reading through these things, and it's
Yeah,
very distracting to try and talk and read at the same
I
time.
know.
I I
So much
haven't
for
figured out how
multitasking.
to chew whatever the saying is. What was the question again?
So the question is, on the flip side of it, right? When should a candidate ever bring up compensation? Or should they never bring it up until the hiring manager brings it up?
Yeah, it's interesting because most of the people that we work with here we're in a situation where we know what's budgeted. They know even when they accept the opportunity to interview with the company what the range generally is.
Hmm.
So that takes that out of the equation. But so I think that if you're just introduced through a friend, I think that nowadays there's so much information out there that there's plenty of people to ask before you ask the hiring manager.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Right? Ask a friend that works there. Go to Glassdoor. Go and I think potentially you can. I don't think most hiring managers are that offended by it, but I think there's it's definitely a huge important equation. But you want to make sure you get all the other information while not wasting your time. So I think it's an okay question to ask, but I would, if I were on the job market, probably try and figure it out before going into the interview and asking that there.
So I think that happens a lot. I think the one thing I tell people, and I think you even said it yourself, you gave the hint. I don't know if anybody else picked up on it. Is that, well, we already know what the hiring range is, right? And candidates get really nervous about this, which means there's a range. There's a low end and a high end, right? And let's be honest. You know, at this point, if they're starting to make me an offer and they're starting to have that conversation, they now want me, which is good, and I do want them. And ultimately, as a salesperson, I have to be willing to walk away if it's not a good deal, whether it's the right job or the wrong salary or the right opportunity, in your sales funnel. So I'm very much a fan of teaching candidates, and of course, all the hiring managers are going to hate me for this, but oh well. Um, Stand in line. Um, hey, thank you so much. You know what? I've gotten really good at this, and I know, and I've done my research that everybody who hires actually has a hiring range. Am I at the low end or the high end?
Oh, that's good.
Right?
Based off my skills and how I'm presenting on this interview, uh,
I want to see
you're
them
at the low
squirm,
end. Ouch.
because if I ask my hiring manager that question and they can't, with literally within a half a second, say you're at the high end, they can't answer it that fast, then I know I'm at the low end and I can squeeze out a little bit more. Right? Like
Oh, you
that's
meant
just
in
the way.
terms of the offer. I thought you meant in terms of like your value. I was like, wow, that's a bold, but I get it.
Yeah, so but I'm a little bit more bold, and it's also different, right? Like if you're like you need a job and you're about to lose the apartment and the rent, and you're just like, take yes, I need to go. I like by all means do what you need to do to take care of yourself. But
I
um,
don't think there's many people in sales in this economy that are feeling that way, though, right? I think that the power, um, you know,
yeah,
people have a lot of opportunities, and I think that on the comp thing, it's an interesting point because we've had some data points recently of companies, and I can't remember if it's the recruiter or the hiring manager or who in the organization. We present the candidate, they are at a certain range, and then they start interviewing and they start getting offers, and their range changes from the day they were introduced to the point where the company is making the offer, and
yep,
that will trigger companies, right? Hey, I thought it was this, now it's this. How did it change so drastically? And I just think we all have to remember that in going through these processes, that we are in a competitive environment. So you want to vet people to make sure they're the right fit for your organization. However, also get them excited about your opportunity and get them an offer that's competitive. Otherwise, you're going to be spending all your time interviewing and trying to do this, getting very frustrated and not investing enough time in your team.
Yep. No, I totally get it. I totally get it. Well, I think we're down to our last 5 minutes, and I think we're going to maybe go ahead and wrap it up because I know Carolyn, you've got to get on to the next thing. But as always, it's a pleasure. I love talking to you. I love. I kind of
Likewise.
feel like I always feel like it's a little bit more of a conversation than an interview, so I really enjoy it. And thank you for sharing a lot about Betts Connect. If folks haven't checked it out, please do. If you're not signed up for their blog, please, by all means, go do it. There's great knowledge out there for you. Goes all the way back to the very first question of how do I keep educating myself to become better at interviewing, right? It goes all the way back. Right? If you're asking that kind of stuff of your candidates, we should be asking that stuff of ourselves and find those resources that are out there. Uh, so on behalf of Sales Hacker, and of course, I think we need to go ahead and give Outreach a big plug since they own Sales Hacker. If you aren't
Yes.
going to Unleash, thank you, Outreach, and Unleash will be another phenomenal sales session in where is it? San Diego this year in
Yeah,
April?
you're gonna be
Can't
there.
remember. Yes, yeah, I am. I need to book a ticket, but yes, I will be there. Are you?
Yes, I will be there. So I will.
Sweet.
If we don't talk before then, which I think there's a high likelihood that we will, I will see you there.
Great, awesome. Well, it's good to chat with you and good to catch up with you, Carolyn. Thank you so much.
And for anyone else that's on this webinar, and if you're coming to Unleash, I would love to meet you guys in person there. So feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or via my email, carolyn@bettsrecruiting.com.
All right. Thanks, Carolyn.
Bye.
Bye.